Welcome to RSE for Grown-Ups. Come along with us as we walk you through the Relationships and Sex Education curriculum, otherwise known as RSE. We will be breaking the current curriculum down into manageable key stage chunks and topics.
This podcast is for parents, caregivers, or anyone in a supportive role with a young person. We will help you feel equipped for the highs and lows of growing up. If you're already listening, then it shows you are committed to supporting the important young people in your life. I'm Kelsie.
And I'm Sophie, and we are outreach workers at Luton Sexual Health. This podcast was funded by Public Health in Luton. Welcome back to RSE for Grown-Ups. Today we are exploring a very, very exciting, much anticipated topic.
We are.
We're talking about Key Stage 2. So we're thinking about your 7 to 11-year-olds. I thought before we jumped into this episode, we'd give a little recap on Key Stage 1. So if we think about somebody entering Key Stage 2, what have they already learned in Key Stage 1? And what are some of the things that are important that they have learned in Key Stage 1 that are going to help them?
Yeah, absolutely. So like we discussed last time, we know that our Key Stage 1 children should have already learned about the pants rule.
Yes.
About how their bodies are private. We would hope they've started to learn those foundations of how to be a good friend, and also how to start asking for consent. So we hope that they've started learning that they're not snatching things from their friends or saying, can I use that? And actually respect for someone's answers when they've said, no, actually can't use that, that's mine, or whatever the challenge happens to be.
Excellent. I think that's probably really important as well, that all those foundations are there just from a perspective of how they then learn about puberty, which is going to raise giggles, laughter, questions.
Yeah.
You've got this. What about, when they start maybe talking about each other in a puberty lesson? So having all of those like boundaries and learning about how to be respectful and stuff, super important actually.
And actually, before you even start teaching a lesson or having a conversation, even within your own home or with your own family about something like puberty, then you might want to actually lay down some ground rules.
Yeah.
And that might be the starting point of your RSE topic is how we're going to lay down a few ground rules about how we talk about this.
Yeah.
We might say, well, if I was doing this with a class, I would say you need to be respectful of the questions that each other are going to ask and of the teacher talking to you. I would say that you don't need to ask any overly private questions.
Yeah.
We are talking about growing up in general. We don't need to be sharing like intensely private information or asking anyone else. So for example, we wouldn't want anybody to be in a classroom shouting, have you started your period yet? Who's done this? Who's done that? Like who gets an erection in a classroom setting? We would say that we're talking about this on a generic basis, not to discuss personal things. And I would also make it quite clear that this lesson is for them and it's being given to them in the context of a lesson.
Yeah.
So what we don't necessarily want is for them to then run out onto the playground and spill every bit of information that they might have acquired with younger children at the school or with siblings, anything else, in a way that isn't age appropriate and is outside of that context.
And because we're going to explore exactly what's on the curriculum in a little while, I think a group agreement or like a ground rules is absolutely brilliant. And you can do that at home as well as parents and carers. And I think not warning children, that's the wrong word, but just preempting some of the materials because they'll be learning about the body. They may see naked bodies, cartoon naked bodies, or they may see cartoon genitalia. So preempting that's going to happen, particularly maybe for young people that may feel particularly anxious about looking at body parts. I mean, looking at body parts can be really scary and a bit frightening and obviously funny and the giggles. But I'm thinking especially for maybe some of our children who have an additional need of some sort that may make those sorts of conversations and looking at those body parts and exploring those body parts just that little bit more anxiety inducing and nerve-wracking, just preempting that they may see some of those images. I mean, quite often in schools they will be looking at cartoons. I don't know if there's many images of real naked bodies. I mean, we certainly don't. If we do work with children, we're always using drawings or cartoons.
Diagrams, cartoons.
Diagrams, exactly. So, and that's probably, I would say, I'd like to say it's what they're also saying.
I think that even with my older young people that I do one-to-ones with, if we talk about labeling the parts of the vulva and the vagina or the penis, we're still doing that with quite cartoon drawings, that kind of thing. I think as well that schools will probably communicate to you. Schools will communicate to families when they're starting to have these lessons, that they're taking place. Schools might have an open afternoon or an open evening for parents to come in and have a look at the RSE materials. We both went to the one that was at my son's school, and that was for Key Stage 2 and Key Stage 3, because he's in a middle school, so it's split slightly differently. So they had all the resources laid out across the table. You could see what curriculum they were working from, exactly what they planned to do with each age group. And schools really encourage that, and they really encourage a sort of open discourse between parents and professionals so that we're all on the same page. Because actually at the end of the day, we do want the same outcomes for our children. Before we start talking about the Key Stage 2 curriculum, when you were talking about naked bodies, you made me think of something quite funny. And so I have heard this story. It didn't happen to me. It happened to my wife and her family. So she had an au pair growing up over the summer holidays, which always makes me laugh. But they'd come from different countries potentially, stay with the family, look after the children over the school holidays. And they had an au pair one summer, and one of the days out that they started to do was to go to the Natural History Museum. And this lady, who was potentially 17 or 18, had never seen a naked man before. So for anyone that's been to the Natural History Museum, there's quite an array of statues of naked men.
And very hairy.
Yeah. All sorts. You've got
all shapes and sizes.
You've got sculpted Grecian sort of busts.
I said hairy. I was thinking of the
evolution. The evolution. So you've got the naked evolution of man. You've got all sorts of different statues. And my mother-in-law basically had to explain
give her her puberty lesson.
Yeah, give her her puberty lesson. And explain kind of that basic anatomy and difference, because where she'd come from, that wasn't something she'd been taught. And my mother-in-law is quite a open and educated person. It had not occurred to her maybe that someone might have been taken aback by that. So their family trip ended up with the au pair being more shocked by the naked people than the children. So
this is why puberty is my favorite lesson. We're talking about this just before, about how I absolutely love teaching puberty. I love the questions. I think it's super important because it literally probably is the only time when I think about my education, I know that was a while ago, where you actually learn about your body. I can't really think of another lesson where you're exploring your own body and things that are happening to your body and get a chance to ask somebody questions about it. It doesn't really then happen again.
And I think the really important thing is that we discuss, it's important to learn about things before they happen. So people might say 7-year-olds, 8-year-olds are not going through puberty, but some are. Some children are starting their period younger. And actually the point of these lessons is to prepare children. It's not to like rush an explanation while something's already happening, but just to make them feel equipped and ready for the changes they might have and that might be coming. Okay, so let's give a little bit of an overview. What exactly is included in the Key Stage 2 curriculum?
Okay, so Key Stage 2 is all things puberty, like we've discussed. So what's going to happen physically to their bodies, but also emotionally as well. So some of those emotional roller coasters to expect and how to manage them. And again, linking back to Key Stage 1, how that might start influencing friendships, relationships, how you feel about school, how you feel about life. Like how to deal with those, some strategies to cope. You know, in puberty, it's like not just your physical changes, but how to then keep yourself healthy, look after yourself, maintain good personal hygiene, really important. The menstrual cycle, and that should be for anybody, not just somebody who has a period. Everybody should be learning about the menstrual cycle, and they'll be learning about that in science. They may start looking at more closely about sex and reproduction, but from the perspective of like plants, how and animals, how they reproduce, and they'll be learning about that in science as well. So just as a note, those topics children won't be able to be pulled out of those lessons because they are part of the health and science curriculum, which is mandatory for everybody to learn.
Yeah, so we have right to withdraw.
Yeah.
Parents do have the right to withdraw their children from relationships and sex education. Yeah. But actually, like we said, biology and reproduction is on the Key Stage 2 biology curriculum.
Yeah.
So they will learn about how humans reproduce in terms of, they'll learn about a cell, cell reproduction, they'll learn about an egg and a sperm and how they meet and how that process of a baby growing starts to happen. So just to clarify, they're not really learning about like the intricacies of sex in that situation at all. Yeah. But it might spark some questions that they might then come home and want to talk a bit more about it and about what they've learned.
Yeah. Yeah. What else? They are also learning about online relationships. So they've done a bit in Key Stage 1 about friendships and relationships and the foundations of a good, healthy, positive one. They may now be linking that to what's it like to put that practice into online gaming, talking to people online, which is massive, I think, for Key Stage 2.
Yeah, it really is.
And also how to identify causes for concern and risky behaviours. You know, how not to share personal information, what personal information is. They may start thinking even like about what settings they should be using and all those sorts of things to like prepare themselves for the online world. Yeah.
Okay, let's do puberty then.
Yeah.
Before we maybe talk a little bit more about that online safety and all the other stuff.
Yeah.
Let's get into it. What do our children need to be learning in Key Stage 2 about puberty, and what things do we think that parents should be talking to their kids about, professionals should be talking to young people about?
I think the obvious one is the body changes. So whenever I've taught a puberty lesson, that is the first thing that I will discuss. I will get the children we've got an outline of a person. The person is like, we don't give them a gender. They're just a person about to go through puberty. And I ask them to draw any body parts on there, or I get them to write what they think is going to happen to them as they get older. And we say it's what growing up is, what's going to happen as your body grows up. And a lot of the time they already know that they're going to start growing hair, that they're going to grow taller. They might start growing muscles. Their voices might change and break.
Boobies always come up.
I have had a lot of boobies being drawn on those. I mean, they do love to draw hair on the pubic area. That's the first place they go. Lots of really really curly pubic hair.
Yeah, all out the armpits,
hairy legs,
big beards.
Big beards. Quite often as well, children draw spots. So they really associate like spots and their skin changing with puberty.
I think young people nowadays are much more aware of like skincare.
I love skincare.
Than we were. Like
they're asking for moisturizer.
Yeah, my daughter has a skincare routine and she puts her little like bunny ear thing around her face, and she's only got like some simple face wash and some Nivea face cream, but she absolutely loves it and loves that kind of element of it's grown up to have a skincare routine. But I don't think that anyone was really talking about skincare routine so much. When we were younger, we were just, oh my God, I've got spots.
Got spots, greasy skin, greasy hair. So they're learning about all the physical body changes, which is really important before they actually start happening. Again, because sometimes that can be extremely overwhelming and you wake up like, I don't remember, we talked about this in the office, I don't remember a gradual change. I just feel like I suddenly woke up and had armpit hair. I suddenly woke up and had hairy legs. Like it wasn't like a slow
I actually remember, this is going to make me sound so old because people listening to this who are my age will have heard of it, but I remember being at Summer Excess at Milton Keynes Bowl, which was like go and see loads of bands. I'm like, way, arms up in the air, having the best time ever, and just kind of glancing over and being like, oh my God, I've got armpit hair. Like
I can't.
Yeah, and then just spending the rest of the day kind of partying like this. We talked about PE and girls and shaving legs and how all of a sudden like your leg hair doesn't really change. Just everyone starts shaving it off at a certain point. And actually talking about whether we need to do that or when we need to do that or why we're making the choice to do those kind of things.
I think that's another really important part of puberty is talking about body image and how you feel about your body and how you talk about your body. That's something that we also covered a tiny bit, I think, in Key Stage 1, but we can recap on is like, having a healthy relationship with your body. And I always, when I'm doing puberty lessons, I'm always like, some people might shave their leg hair, some people might not. And we don't put a gender on it either. It's just like some people may choose to. Like some people may choose to get rid of their facial hair, some people may not. So they're learning about, how they can make themselves feel the most comfortable going through probably the most uncomfortable process of your life.
I think as well, how we talk about our bodies around our children at this really crucial period of time is super important and it really does matter. Yeah. And I know that body image is important for everyone, but particularly when you are raising young girls, if you're standing in front of the mirror saying, I hate my stomach. I don't like my stretch marks. I don't know, this bit's wrong. This is saggy. My boobs don't look great. You're being hypercritical about your body in front of your children. And as I've grown up, I've kind of settled on the fact that my body is my body. I don't actually have to like deeply love it. I don't have to think everything about it is amazing. And I don't have to hate it either. I can just objectively exist in the body I have. And if there's anything that I want to pass on to like my daughter and my son as well, but to my children, is to be kind about their body. It is the vessel that you use to get yourself through life. And it's the one you've got.
Exactly. So. That my friend, that she's got two much younger children who, well, actually, now I say that, one of them will be starting Key Stage 2 soon, and they'll take pictures of me when we're out and about, and I'll look at it, I'll go, oh, Auntie Sophie looks, and then their mum will say, lovely, you look lovely. And I'm like, yes, I look lovely, because otherwise they will learn that when they look at themselves, they have to pull apart every single part of themselves. And I just think that's really important. Again, like just such a good foundation so that when they then go to secondary school and they're starting to mix with more people, becoming more self-conscious naturally of themselves and their body, that all of those like fundamentals of, like you said, just existing and being happy is important.
I remember my daughter kind of jumping on me on the bed with her hands deep into my tummy saying, why is your belly so squishy? And saying, because you grew in it. That's it. That's that. That's exactly why. And that's not I like it, I don't like it, I have any sort of strong feelings about it. We're just objectively existing.
You just grew there. So yes, body image, learning about why our bodies are going to change. The emotional part, why do you think that's so important for young people to understand? Like, because I guess the big thing is they need to understand why puberty is happening. So hormones, that's why. So they can have that's what fascinated me the most about puberty. And I loved teaching it from a hormone perspective of like our brains release these chemicals that cause all of these changes to happen. But at the same time, that means that emotionally, like we may just feel a little bit tangential from the planet, as my mum would say, for a little while. And that's like important to notice, and it can have an effect on how you feel about school, how you feel about people at home. You may start feeling angry or more upset by things, or more tearful, and you may have extremes throughout the day. And like, we that's okay, but we have to learn how to manage and cope, and we have to have some good strategies in place. I think that's where home comes in most important.
Absolutely. And I think that we have a tendency to like our teenagers and our young people are experiencing, like we said in the last episode, all these big feelings, but they're not really necessarily that big to us. Like what they're experiencing might feel like the end of the world, but to us as adults, we can be like, it's fine. But actually we have to accept that it is a big change that they're going through, and we need to like validate that and help them to understand that experience, because they go from just being children to charged with all this energy that they don't know what to do with it. And we're like, oh, you're so hormonal. Oh my God, they're being such hormonal teenagers. And they're like, okay, what do you mean by that? Like, we'll kind of brush it off, but they don't understand that hormonal process. So it is really, really interesting.
And their feelings towards like people may change. They may start thinking about who they fancy. And like, that's a massive part of negotiating, again, all of the things that they have already learned, like consent and personal space and what's appropriate and what's not appropriate. And, you know, that's it's a big part of growing up.
It is a big part of growing up.
What else are we saying about what else is important that they know? Periods, menstruation. And like I said at the beginning, for anybody, it doesn't matter if someone doesn't have a period, they need to know, because, I think it's really important that young boys are in lessons about the period and what the menstrual cycle is, because they will know somebody who has a period. And it's just, again, just how bodies work, and it's how babies are made. And it's it's a requirement. All the dots just align. It's like, it needs to be taught. And like you said, because girls are starting their period as young as 8 now, like the usual age is between 12 and 15, but we know that lifestyle, and if young girls have experienced more stress in their life, they're more likely to start their period younger. And I think there's nothing more like scary or intimidating than having your first bleed and having no clue why, or no context as to why. And I think that's like, for puberty, for me, that's a massive topic. And
I think the fact that obviously if we cut ourselves and we bleed, that's a sign of an issue. So for our entire childhood, if you cut and you bleed, you're like, oh my God, I need a plaster, I've got a problem. So actually, if you pull your knickers down and you've got blood in your knickers and you're not expecting that, you're going to think potentially that there's a problem. I think also the other thing to point out is that it's a big responsibility to manage a period at a young age. So we might talk to our child about how they be prepared for that, because they don't start nicely at home on a Saturday morning when you're all prepared. Like,
mine started my first day of a new school.
Oh, lovely. Triggered by stress.
First day of a new school, I started my period. So
amazing. So actually, we as parents and caregivers and professionals want to think about how we prepare people for that. And there are lots more options when it comes to being prepared for periods and menstrual hygiene than there were really when we were younger. So we're often recommending period pants.
Yes, I think that's a brilliant thing for someone in key stage 2 if they have started their period, or it could start at any time, to have some period pants in their bag and to know what they are and why. And they're just, I really recommend period pants. We do, don't we, to people who may have a sensory impairment, where bleeding and having things in knickers or wearing underwear in general might just be something that's really tricky day to day. So to have something super comfortable, seamless, something you don't need to change as much as a pad, for example, is brilliant.
And you don't run the risk of having like the wing folded over and stick into the side of your leg. Because as someone with sensory issues, that's really annoying.
Exactly.
Things like that. So we want to encourage people to be prepared and to let their daughters be prepared for what is coming ahead. So we might talk about period planning, having a little pack in your bag with the necessary supplies you might need. So a spare pair of knickers, a pad, if that's what you chose to use, a pair of period pants, something like to put dirty things in. So if we're using period pants, it's convenient to just be able to whip them off, put a clean pair on.
Or if you leak in your pants, you've got a spare pair of pants, something like that. If you've leaked
wipes,
through a pad, wipes.
Something that makes you feel fresh. Any of those kind of things can really help a young person to feel prepared. And actually, we talked even very in our introduction about the fact that teachers have to take on so much responsibility in a school, whether that be for the young person's mental well-being or for their education or for their health. It isn't necessarily a job that a teacher's prepared for, to be there in the moment with someone during their first period if they've never had any conversation about that before.
So, and we have conversations with teachers who work in maybe a SEND provision where there's support needed for toileting, and that then includes, reminding a young person who maybe has an additional need that they need to go and change their pad, or maybe even helping them to change their pad, and sort of being there during that process. And I don't know how much training there is available, or things like that to prepare somebody for that.
No.
So it's trying to empower the young people as much as possible, I suppose, like you said, to take responsibility.
Yeah, and also to look after each other. If Well,
that's the thing. I was always carrying around pads and stuff that you would just hand out to your friends.
Everyone.
Anyone got a tampon, you know, like you would just, it was really quite normal.
It's worth noting that lots of the schools do support initiatives where like menstrual hygiene products are available for free in schools. I think pretty much I think all of the secondary schools in the town that we are working in have free menstrual hygiene products.
Yeah.
Okay, so what do you think are the top 5 things that young people need to be aware of about periods and about their cycle? Let's not say periods, let's say their menstrual cycle.
Well, I think that's the top one. I did a menstrual cycle lesson with 15, 16-year-old boys the other day because they were like, can someone get pregnant on their period? Can you have sex on your period? I don't think that's important for Key Stage 2 to know. What I'm saying is, again, a building block. So if they already know what a menstrual cycle is, it will help them when they come to thinking about
fertility.
Knocked over my little penis. When they think about fertility and contraception and having sex. So it's like super important. So understanding what the menstrual cycle is.
Understanding that it's a menstrual cycle. Yeah, absolutely.
And how, I would say second is, like you said, how to care for your period.
Yeah, your hygiene.
So your hygiene, how often you should be changing period products, that it's also your choice which period products that you use. And that I think this is just a general rule for anybody with a vagina. Your vagina on your period and just your vagina in general does not need to smell lovely like roses. It's going to smell like a vagina.
Yep.
And if you're going to wash, just use warm water. Of course, like when you're on your period, you want to feel a little bit
clean and fresh,
and you can shower and bathe and use warm water, but no soaps or anything up there to try and make it smell nice.
I definitely think you've covered 2 and 3 there. Yeah. So I think we've got being aware of the fact that it's a cycle.
Yes.
We've got being prepared when it comes to hygiene.
Yep.
And then also actually knowing how to look after a vagina, not using things like scented and flowery soaps and those kind of things. Yeah, absolutely. Anything else that you think?
This is a tricky one, especially for a Key Stage 2 maybe to understand, but something that I think you could talk about at home is just to monitor maybe like how painful your periods are and how heavy a flow is. So when you learn about periods, children should be learning about different flows and how some people may have a slightly heavier flow or at the beginning of your period, you might have more blood flow than towards the end. And also like how much blood they're actually losing, because some people think it's like gallons and litres and gushing with blood.
I actually do remember that from school.
Or something, isn't it? A day or something like that. We have to fact check that. I don't think that's accurate, but it's smaller than you think.
I do remember doing an activity where you had like a sanitary towel and like a couple of like spoonfuls,
and you could see how much it
absorbs.
That's also a great thing to do with your young person, is to like test out the products before they put them in the pants, see how they work. I love putting a tampon in water with a young person and they're like, wow, it's so, and you're like, soaks it all up, and it's cool. It's not making it scary. It's making it
to
fun.
Feel confident.
Yeah.
Excellent.
So monitoring period pain, how much it affects your daily life, starting to think about, if it's keeping you off school when you have your period, maybe that's something that, parents need to support with a little visit to the GP. I think monitoring.
Excellent.
Yeah.
I think I am going to add number 5 because I have thought of, I thought of one more thing and then it went away. What was I going to say about periods? Oh yeah, about the emotional side that comes along with it. Because actually, women and the emotional side of periods, or the hormonal side of it, is actually something which we might be aware of because it's pretty mocked in the media.
Yeah. Are you on your period?
You're on your period. Oh, you're going to sit there with ice cream and cry. But actually, it's a massive drop in hormones.
Yeah.
So when you understand that how your cycle works a little bit more, that when people are ovulating, that they have that really high levels of energy, high levels of hormone, high levels of interest.
Yes.
And then actually in the sort of before your period, that hormone level has really dropped down. Yeah. And that might be why you're feeling quite sad or overwhelmed.
Sensitive.
Sensitive.
Tired.
Oh, so tired. So tired.
Yeah, exactly. That's so important. That's like part of them learning about the menstrual cycle as a whole, isn't it? And like the different stages, like they've got different names, everything. I think it's like, no matter how old they are, if they're going to have a period, they should know from the very beginning.
From the beginning.
We've also met young people who are at college and we've recapped puberty because some of them maybe have a learning need and it's really important for them to understand all of this stuff before we then would talk about like contraception, for example. And I've had girls go, oh, that's why I have a period. Oh, that's what's happening. Oh, so it's an egg being released and then it doesn't get fertilized. Oh, it all makes sense now.
Yeah, or like it's the lining of the uterine wall. So we talk about explaining the difference that period blood is not the same as the rest of your, because we say blood, people assume that it is exactly the same, but actually it is really, it's just the shedded lining of the uterus. And when we talk about cramps, that is because our uterus is contracting to release that line and things like that. Yeah. Okay, excellent. So we have periods in the bag. We're happy to talk about them. We're going to chat to girls about their periods. We're going to tell boys about what's happening.
Definitely.
We're going to fight that stigma that everyone's just PMSing, emotional, crying and eating ice cream and chocolate, but we'll still buy them ice cream and chocolate if they want it.
Of course.
Okay, and we're going to talk about hygiene. So hygiene is actually a really good point when we are talking about key stage 2 and the changes that young people go through and the changes their bodies go through. I know with my son that as he has got older, I'm like, go and get in the shower. Like,
wash.
Is it a complicated principle that you need to regularly, like he's got quite long hair and he's not like going through puberty in a way that he might have spots or he hasn't got anything like that, but actually he needs to wash his hair more often. It gets greasy quicker. So I'm like, you need to remember, if you want to have long hair, you need to be responsible for that. And it's the same like with the girls, like all of a sudden you're just like, when did this happen? My hair starts getting greasy.
And like giving them responsibility to start washing their bodies themselves, maybe, you know, it depends on your child and maybe what their needs are and what you feel is appropriate for them. But like encouraging them to have their shower or their bath by themselves and wash their own hair in private and wash their genitals with warm water and like put deodorant on. I'm always like to children, what are you going to pack in your puberty bag? Like we've got our period pack, but we also might need our little puberty bag because we start getting smellier. And they're always like, deodorant. I'm like, yes. Because you can't shower at school all the time. You know, in secondary school, they might be able to shower after PE, but primary school, you're all getting changed in there together after, you know, running around. So like, putting a little thing of deodorant in their bag so that they can just keep themselves fresh throughout the day, you know, all those things like, you have to keep yourself clean now.
Keep yourself clean.
It's your responsibility.
And actually, an awkward conversation maybe to have as a parent, and my children are growing up in a house with 2 mums, so I don't know, maybe in other families this might just be dad's hands down responsibility. But actually, if you've got a child with a penis, you have to teach them how to wash it.
Oh yeah. You do.
Like, because they have to know how to wash it properly. That is part of basic hygiene. It isn't necessarily the most normal conversation to have with your kid to be like, you have to roll the skin all the way back and clean it. Yeah. But we know from our head nurse particularly that she's not fond of having to tell adult men that they need to roll their skin down and wash. So that's a really important conversation to be having. Yeah. We talked a lot about periods, but penises play a huge part in the puberty conversation too. So what things that are challenging come up in the conversation when we're talking about boys and puberty and penises?
Well, I'm thinking of 2 specific things that probably parents and carers would encounter more than maybe teachers at a school, but it's how to have conversations and preempt things like wet dreams and random erections, because they are things that will happen to people with penises when they go through puberty because of the hormones. Which one should we start with?
Let's start with random erections because everyone, let's go back to films and stereotypes. Everyone has seen some sort of like coming of age movie where the person needs to go up to the front of the class.
And they stand up.
And they stand up and they're trying to rearrange and they're uncomfortable. And that is awkward and difficult for young people and something that happens spontaneously. It happens to them at different points in their puberty journey as well. So they might not necessarily feel like it's something they can talk to their peers about.
No, but that's why I guess a lesson on it is really important. And I'll be honest, I've done a lesson on, I did back-to-back sort of sessions with a group of children who all had an additional need in a SEND school. And the way that those children listened when I was talking about, I explained that that's what we were going to be talking about. And there was lots of, oh God, that's so embarrassing, and bright red faces. But actually, the people that were the culprits for being sent out of the classroom were the two teachers who could not control their laughter when we were talking about erections, and the boys started to ask questions about it. And actually, if you're having conversations in a school setting or you're having conversations at home about how that might start happening, and again, like the science as to why it's happening, it's a blood rush to the penis, which causes it to go hard or stiff uncontrollably sometimes. You could start talking about maybe it happens if you think about
sexual things. But I think it's also important to highlight, especially when they're young, that just because somebody has got a spontaneous erection, it doesn't mean that they're thinking about sexual things.
Exactly.
And I have heard an example of a child who kind of came home and said to their parent, like, oh, I got in trouble at school today because I didn't want to go up to the front of the class and give a presentation because I had an erection, and they're trying to hide it. And there was a bit of an altercation between the parents because mum was not particularly understanding of that scenario. She, what do you mean you had an erection at school? Why were you thinking about naughty things at school? And dad's like, no, it happens.
Yeah.
So just kind of, if parents have got a good understanding that that is normal and that can happen, then they can make their child feel kind of more safe and comfortable.
And to not be alarmed if it happens at home on the sofa when they're watching telly. It doesn't mean that they are turned on by something they're watching or something they've seen. It could just be...
We know even with adults, like morning erections are something that happen to adults with penises, and it just is what it is. It's your body's way of just pumping blood around and making sure everything's working. So what can get a little bit more difficult is talking about wet dreams.
Yes. Yeah, wet dreams is, because, and that's why talking probably about erections first is a good thing, because they know that can happen. I think wet dreams are very difficult sometimes because it's a sensory experience, much like a period. It's a very sensory experience, and it happens overnight. So somebody's not conscious or aware that it's happening, and you just wake up. Yeah, just
actually, just to clarify, from the language of using, what are we talking about? So actually what we mean by a wet dream is like somebody coming in their sleep. Like,
So it's just a release of ejaculation in their sleep, and they may wake up and their boxers might be wet, or their pajamas might be wet, their bed might be wet, and they may think they've wet themselves, I suppose, especially if they don't know why, or they've had a conversation. And again, it's about them helping them to understand why that's happened. It's not a cause for concern. It doesn't mean they're doing... I think this is the thing as well, is that young people, and we talked about this in Key Stage 1, they feel like their private parts are private. So we very much have established that rule. Yes. It's private. And sometimes that can lead to young people not wanting to talk about them, because private also means to yourself. It's yours.
Keep it to yourself.
Keep it to yourself. And like, that's fine. But it can also then cause a lot of like embarrassment and shame and a bit of humiliation, that they're like, oh God, this is happening to my body, and it feels naughty, or it feels wrong, or it feels rude, icky. Like, we need to be able to say, no, that's normal and that's okay, and actually give them the facts about why it happens and what it is, and then maybe some strategies to cope with it by themselves. So again, cleaning, or saying, Mum, I think, well, whoever's at home, I think we need to wash my bed sheets, or, I need to put my pajamas in the wash. Maybe I need some tissues by my bedside table, or some wipes or something, in case I wake up and it's really uncomfortable and I want to go back to sleep. All those things that can just be like
empowering. Yeah. And actually, as our children, like when we're talking about Key Stage 2, the end of Key Stage 2 is year 6. Yeah. That's when they're getting ready for secondary school. And actually, by the time they are 11 and they're at the end of year 6, they might be able to change their own bed.
Yeah.
Just throwing it out there. We don't necessarily need to do all of these things for them. We can go, okay, that's fine. If you want to take your sheet off and chuck it in the wash, that's lovely. Okay. Thank you. Yeah. We don't need to have a conversation about why
True. You can just do it.
You can just do it.
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
I know that if your stuff is in the wash, you know it needs washing.
And again, like when we talk about things, I think the way we've discussed it and the way we would discuss it with young people and the way you discuss it with your son, again, we're talking about it in a very like factual, these are your bodies and this is what your body does. This is what your penis might do. This is, we're not, again, and this is for parents and carers that might feel, oh, but does that mean you're going to have a conversation about sexual arousal at Key Stage 2? Or you're going to,
start talking about masturbation?
No. I mean, to be honest, what I will say, and maybe I'll say this for the end, sometimes these conversations can then prompt young people to share that it feels nice when they touch their private parts, when they touch their penis, when they touch their vagina. But I guess that's actually a really safe way of talking about it and exploring it. Again, like a ground rule, they may not talk about that at school, but they may then come home and ask, well, yeah, but when I get an erection, sometimes it feels nice when I touch it. And it's like,
I also remember that the first time that I personally realized that touching certain parts of my own body felt nice, I think I thought I was the only person in the world that knew that.
Yeah.
Like, oh my God.
I've discovered something incredible.
Yeah, I have unlocked this secret. And so I went and told my family, like, did you know? They're like, we know, thanks. Moving on.
Before we go on to like the last part of what Key Stage 2 is and the online risks and how to keep them safe and start sort of exploring relationships online, I didn't know whether you wanted to mention one of the books that you gave your son when he started puberty, which we've actually got just lined up here, which was a really helpful resource for you.
It was. So I bought this book. It's called The Everybody Book. And the reason why I chose this book was because I was looking for a resource that was LGBT plus inclusive. And I was recommended that. It talks about things in a really factual and objective way. It's got some really good diagrams. And I really wanted my son to be prepared for puberty. So I bought him that book. I had a look through it, a little flick through, and kind of gave him it, sent him on his way. And he wanted to look at that book on his own. And I was like, yeah, no worries. You have a look, come back and chat to me. Okay. So then maybe, I don't know, half an hour later, he comes marching back down the stairs. Did you know that mummy hadn't read the last chapter of the book? So the last chapter of this book talks about pornography. And it talks about how pornography is something that is accessed by adults. Tells about how it's for entertainment purposes. It talks about the fact that it's between consenting adults and that they choose to do that and they are paid to do that. I didn't really realize that the book had that chapter. But actually, it was a really good conversation and a really good opportunity, because I actually genuinely know that my son's first experience of finding out that pornography was a thing was through reading a book where it explained that it was entertainments for adults. Whereas my first experience of knowing pornography was a thing was like seeing a grotty magazine, like ripped up in a bus stop on the way to school in the morning. So although it wasn't necessarily what I was anticipating, and he was very much in Key Stage 2, he was in year 6, I think, when I got that resource and was looking for different things. I was quite pleased, really. I was a bit taken aback when he come down and says, did you know, I'm going to tell you that porn exists? Yes. Amazing. Thank you. But actually I was really, now he's in year 8 and he's a lot older, and that's when the young people at school are starting to say, oh, look at this video. I saw this, I saw that. But he already knew about it before he was ever exposed to it. I think, and that is the point again of this education, is to prepare them for things that they may see, hear, or start talking about before they get there. And I think this is probably maybe out of date now, but I think the Internet Watch Foundation did a survey and it said that young people at the age of 9 were more likely to be, that's the first time that they will be exposed to porn now, is 9 years old. They may just click on a link. It doesn't mean that they're searching or looking for it, but they may just be showed it. It may just pop up on whatever they're looking at. I've worked with young people who are watching, car YouTube videos, and in the suggested boxes underneath, it's like how people kiss passionately, and they're learning how to kiss people. Like, they're just going to see stuff. If they're on the internet, they're going to see things. Absolutely. So to know about it before, I think
how amazing.
It is. It's really important. And I think the whole online safety element of that curriculum is really important. Like young people really do need to know how to keep themselves safe online. They need to know that it isn't appropriate to share information online. And it's such a big topic and it's so intricate that we're going to do an episode that is specifically about raising your children in a world of online. And we will kind of go back to all the different ages and revisit it in much more detail. But I think the key information for young people is if you see something online that makes you feel uncomfortable, talk to an adult on it. Not every bit of content on the internet is made to be viewed by children. Sometimes they just have to accept it's not. It's not for you. Like not all of the internet is for you. And actually, how do I communicate about what I've seen, how I feel, how that made me feel?
Amazing. So before we finish, do we have any questions from parents or carers, or have we had any questions from young people who are in Key Stage 2, who are learning about puberty and periods that we think would be helpful to share, even if they're just funny stories or...
Yeah, I think that we've both had parents say to us, I know my child is masturbating. What do I do? About that? And that has...
And actually they are normally that age group, aren't they? When parents come to us, it is because they're still in primary school, but they're just at the other end of primary school.
And also when we say children masturbating, we don't necessarily mean that they are doing it with any kind of knowledge around what they're doing. So we might have children that are like humping things quite a lot, rubbing up against stuff, maybe doing it for prolonged periods of time because they're not really able to work out how to bring it to a close. They can't really work out how to finish it off. So we find that parents are uncomfortable
with the length of time they're doing it and like, talking about it. So what's some of our advice? I think for me, one of the main things is if they're doing it anywhere but their bedroom is just to immediately redirect them to their bedroom. So they're not allowed to do it in the living room or, somewhere public where anybody spaces. Could walk in. It's just, it's really just affirming that the only place that is appropriate is in your own bedroom.
If they have their own bedroom.
If they have their own bedroom, because
if that's not, we'll have to redirect to bathroom.
To the bathroom, definitely. What about advice for, and also with that, there are actually quite a lot of resources for parents to have around the house, like social stories. I've had parents use comic strips, making your own sort of like, I guess, easy read on how to do it and how to do it safely and how to clean up afterwards, all those things. So if you don't always feel comfortable having that conversation, or you think your child might understand better by reading something or looking at something, there are lots of that. There are good things online.
There are. All of these books that we've got in front of us are resources that are kind of aimed at that age group. And I think what we can do is in the description for the episode, we'll add a link to our Padlet or to some of our resources so that people can, if they want to, get some more books or have a look at a few different things. But I think that my key thing of how to answer children in this age group is we need to start being honest. We need to start being honest with them about their bodies, what's happening with them, that they're not alone, that they're not going through changes that are individual just to them, and that there isn't lots of shame around it. It's just a normal part of growing up.
Amazing.
Fab. Right. So next time we are going to be really getting into it with our Key Stage 3 curriculum. So Key Stage 3 is our 12 to 15. Yeah, 12 to 14. It's year 7, 8 and 9. We know the school years. So we're going to be really getting into it with our year 7, 8s and 9s, those young people who are starting to form relationships, who are trying to gain their independence and move away from situations where things are quite so monitored by parents. So really looking forward to talking to you all about that. And thank you very much.
Thank you. We'll see you next time. Bye.